What is up, Bizarre Society, and welcome back to one of the most bizarre shows on the internet. Specifically, this is the one where we take a question, clip, or article, and we let our minds wander about it. For anybody that may not be familiar, we do tend to call this show Bizarre Inquiries. I am the one that some refer to as Shane, aka the original Shane Squatch. And alongside me, as per usual, I have the one, the only, the big bad Boo Daddy himself, Sir Orpheus.
Daddy.
Oh, yeah.
Welcome to the show, bro.
Thank you for having me yet again. And I like the inclusion of the Macho Man Randy Savage there in the intro. That was pretty good.
Dude, I love that bell. I'm going to make sure I keep that for every single episode. I just love that thing way too much, man. And I had to throw in some LA Knight, of course, because, you know, you can't have a good enough wrestling intro unless you throw in some LA Knight. Yes, so why not?
Knight. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me talk to you.
Well, speaking of, I hear that we've got an important announcement that you might want to talk to the listeners and viewers about.
So for anybody that's been with us for a very long time, I assume that you know that our usual recording days / live days for Bizarre Inquiries is usually on Thursdays. But due to current circumstances with stuff going on with babysitters and all that kind of stuff for me, we ended up having to shift the recording date. So going forward, we will now be doing Bizarre Inquiries and Bizarre Encounters on Mondays. So if anybody is interested in hopping in on the lives, make sure you guys mark your calendars that, again, going forward, we will not be doing Bizarre Inquiries on Thursdays anymore. We will now be doing it on Mondays. So,
yep, that's right. So that means our next episode of Bizarre Inquiries is going to be Monday, June the 1st. Still roughly 7:15 Eastern Time, still on the Bizarre Reality Media YouTube channel. Everything else is the same except the day of the week. So as always, you guys be sure to submit questions, clips, articles, anything you want us to inquire about, and also join us in the chat during the episodes.
And moving on to what we will be diving into today. So I have kind of a weird one. This has kind of been somewhat of a thought experiment. And I don't know if you're familiar, but have you seen these videos that have kind of been popping up where they're like these montages of like the 2000s and they say like, remember who you are, white boy? Have you seen those on like Instagram or anything?
I don't think so.
Well, let me add a little bit of context because this is going to be one of those ideas that's kind of drawn out, but this is what initially kind of sparked this idea. So
Okay.
It's relatively
We're going on
short.
a journey here, it sounds like.
We're going on a slight little journey here.
Okay.
So these are relatively short. I got 3 of them. I just want to kind of fit in the context and make sure that everybody kind of sees exactly what I'm talking about here. So without further ado, I'm going to bring up this first one, and then I'll kind of get into the idea that I want to talk about. So looking into some of these videos, I started noticing that there seems to be a pretty big commonality when you start looking into some of the pop culture based around, I guess you can say like 90s and 2000s people. And one of the things that I kind of wanted to dive into specifically, and maybe you can kind of break this one down a little bit before I continue further, Linkin Park, something that we covered relatively recently. After watching some of these videos and kind of having this weird thought in my head that I'm going to kind of build into, I started looking at some of the old Linkin Park music with very different contexts. So after knowing some of the stuff about Chester and all the stuff that, you know, he was trying to expose and everything, you go back and you listen to like Meteora or you listen to Hybrid Theory, and you get a very, very different context from it. And Orin, if you want to fill in the listeners a little bit, I'm sure that you probably know lyrics right offhand that you could probably throw at this one.
Well, I mean, just the first 2 albums, like you said, Meteora and Hybrid Theory, they're just like so fucking angsty, and like that's the shut up if when I'm talking to you, and just like it's like there's a big difference between those first 2 and then the third album. You know, like those first 2 albums are like capital G great, and I think they kind of lost a little bit of their edge when they came out with the Minutes to Midnight album, the one with like all the songs from the Transformers movies and whatever. But I'm gonna kind of let you cook and see what you come up with as far as lyrics and songs. But yeah, there's a lot of anti-authority and a lot of everything kind of sucks in those first couple albums for sure.
See, and that's what I'm trying to get at here. Because if you remember recently, I was talking about this whole thing about the culture in the 90s and 2000s based around rock and everything like that. And it seems that during the 90s and 2000s, one of the main things that seemed to have been brought up as a main part of the culture is this like fuck authority, fuck the establishment. I mean, even looking at wrestling, what was happening during that era?
Yeah, like
you had
the
ruthless
era.
aggression era, the attitude era.
Yeah.
And at the same time that this was happening, you also had shows like Viva La Bam, you had stuff like Jackass, you had stuff like CKY. So it almost kind of seems like we were almost intentionally grown up in this culture that was intentionally meant to be a counterculture. Like even down to like kids music. Like look at like Scooby-Doo, for example, back when we were kids. What was the music that was the main theme for it? It was like punk music. Like all these cartoons had punk. That was like the main thing that was almost being pushed towards kids music. It was like ska, then it went into punk. So I started thinking about this whole thing about why is it that our entire generation seemed to have been intentionally brought up on this culture of violence, fuck authority, I'm different than you, punk, we're totally different. We're different than previous generations. And then I started kind of sitting back a little bit and realizing that some of the stuff that I've been talking about on the show recently, as far as like trying to separate the generations, like this seems like it could have been something that goes back like way further than that. Like, because if you look at essentially what happened to the counterculture from like our generation, it essentially went into two different places. You know, you have one, the people that were the counterculture punk rockers and everything that eventually ended up turning into this whole like woke movement, weirdly enough, which is very, very strange if you really think about it, because it's almost like the counterculture ended up getting control to a certain extent. And then the other half of us kind of broke off and we did this whole thing where it's like, you know, we almost like want to be left alone. It's like we've gotten into conspiracies, we watch everything, we're aware of everything, we're aware of the counterculture, but we've been around it for so long that we've essentially become like numb to it, where we almost like watch it like
You've
a
become
show.
so numb. I see what
Exactly.
you did there.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah. But it's almost like we've like we're aware of it, but we're not actually like actively like doing something about it. So then I started thinking about this whole thing about back in the 60s and like psyoping that generation where everybody thought the hippie movement was this counterculture generation that was like, you know, sparking love and stopping war. But you really start looking into like the deeper facets of it. And you start realizing that the whole intention behind the hippie generation was one, keeping all the people that didn't want to go to war off busy somewhere. And they're also experimenting on them with LSD and acid and everything once you start looking into the Grateful Dead and all that kind of shit. So it almost kind of seems like this whole idea about controlling the counterculture and creating the counterculture has been something that's happened multiple times. But going into like our current generation, it seems like there's been this constant movement where they're trying to intentionally separate generations as much as possible. And it almost kind of seems like there's been different attempts at how we could possibly do this. Like you had the peace and love generation, and then you get into the 90s and 2000s and you had the like punk, I'm different than you, I'm going to break off. The ongoing joke for every white family was fuck you, mom and dad.
Yeah, but in between those two, you kind of had like the 80s yuppie generation, which I think is kind of a lot of the 90s stuff you're talking about, like the whole like have you watched any of the documentaries about like Woodstock 99 and how they're kind of like juxtaposing that against like the original Woodstock?
I have not, but I'm aware of it and how bad of like a fail and everything. Essentially, like both of them really were.
I mean, it kind of plays into exactly what you're saying, but basically, long story short, where I was going with that is, I think like the 80s Reagan era yuppie kind of generation might have directly led to a lot of this anger and, you know, the anti-authoritarianism in like the late 90s and early 2000s.
Do you think that it was something that happened naturally, or do you think that it was something that was intended to happen? Or even on the flip side, do you think that it's something that happened naturally and then they just took advantage of a situation? Because at a certain point, you get to a point where it's just like, you start looking at all these like memorable things from our generation, and it's like, there's nothing that's really like wholesome, so to speak. Everything is extremely violent, anti-authority, like disrespectful towards your friends. Like I said, even like Viva La Bam, CKY, all that kind of stuff. Like, we got to a point where like our generation was almost known for like beating up on each other, you know, like even wrestling fans, like how often did you go up and give a stone cold stunner to one of your friends without any kind of warning or anything, you know, like we were just like essentially raised, it seems like, to be this like counterculture generation. And it's again weird because now it seems like a lot of these people have turned into either the woke or just completely numb to everything. So in a weird way, it's almost like they took all that aggression, learned how to break it off into two, and then fizzle it out almost.
Oh, a couple of thoughts here. To answer your first question, I think it's probably some of all of the above. You know, I think some of this probably was manufactured by the powers that be. I think a lot of it was kind of probably just, you know, seizing on the moment and, you know, different people using, you know, shifting cultural things for their own gain. But, you know, like we said, I think a lot of this is in response to like kind of the fakeness, if you will, and the overly like bubblegum glitziness of like the 80s, and, you know, like when Nirvana came in the 90s and everything was like grungy and like more stripped down to basics. And, you know, that was kind of short lived. And by the early 90s, we kind of moved on from that. And then, like you said, in the late 90s, it's the Limp Bizkit break stuff generation that kicks in. And kind of jumping to what you were saying about like going in different directions now, I think what's kind of interesting about this is due to the internet and, you know, social media and everybody who, you know, has a fucking phone in their pocket can broadcast their opinion all over the world. I think one, like we don't have these like set in stone generations like we used to, because things just move so much quicker and it's so much more fluid. And, you know, you're not going to have like these core things that are associated with the 60s or these core things that are associated with the 70s nowadays, because things just move so much quicker. And my second point on all that is we've kind of like almost weaponized idiots at this point by giving everybody a platform. And I think like the extremes on both sides of the aisle have kind of become the quote unquote norm. Like, even though, you know, most people fall somewhere in the middle of that continuum, it's like the most
Loudest
vocal
voices are heard the most.
Yeah, the most vocal minorities on both sides are kind of, you know, the lunatic fringe that get the most media coverage and like just suck up all the oxygen. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of things at play with that, but yeah, a lot of interesting thoughts here. I know I've kind of been scattered and all over the place. I kind of wish I had prepared my thoughts for this a little bit better, because this is some really interesting stuff to talk about and think about, I think.
Well, I mean, even just breaking down some music, for example. I mean, I kind of want to get into this one too, like System of a Down. Listening to some old System of a Down, for example. It's like, yes, it's known for being extremely goofy, but on the flip side of it, like, have you ever actually like listened to the stuff that they talk about, even in their like goofy songs? Like, they're talking about government conspiracies, they're talking about like private prison systems. Like, it's so strange to me that within our generation's music, they almost like talked about these conspiracies constantly within the music, almost like they were like trying to like lay out the groundwork. Like, to a certain extent, it almost kind of makes you wonder, because especially back in like the 90s, 2000s, it's not like people were just independently producing conspiracy music and putting it out on the internet. Like, there had to have been executives, elites, all these people approving this stuff for it to be put out. So like, even just Linkin Park, System of a Down, all these bands putting
like
out
Rage
these
Against
albums.
the Machine, they're basically
Rage
like
Against the
card-carrying communists.
Yeah, and ironically, they were like the first one that was like, you know, fuck the system, and they were the first one to crumble during COVID and everything. That's why, another reason why I kind of go back to this whole idea that are all of these people that were intended to be like, fuck the authority, actually like placed there by authority. Because even getting into Chester, as much as, you know, I enjoy Chester's music and everything, you know, diving into all this stuff that he was involved in, who knows where he could have been at this, that current point in his life. Meaning that if he was abused and everything as a kid, you know, there could have been something that was intentional, like they let him create those first two albums, or they wanted him to create those first couple of albums to try to get the information out, but also try to like almost hide it behind like, you know, this music that people are just going to associate it with the music and everything. And I don't know, it almost kind of seems like a lot of these artists were somewhat in the know with the stuff they were talking about, and the stuff that they were talking about, again, like, I don't understand how it was getting just like passed like it was cool when there had to have been big execs at that time that were like passing these things. Like, it, again, it almost seems intentional.
Well, I mean, granted, there's like different layers to all of this shit. There's different layers to Hollywood. There's different layers to the music industry.
How did those bands even get that big in the first place at that time? Like, even that's just
Well,
mind
that was
blowing, because you
before
could
Napster.
never imagine a band like System of a Down being like a chart topper now. Like, what?
Well, I mean, that's a whole nother can of worms to open. You know, like everybody talks shit about Metallica and about how, you know, they were such assholes for like trying to shut down Napster and everything, but they were fucking right. You know, like the music industry is pretty much ruined. They've sucked all the magic out of music. But, you know, like I was saying, there's different levels to like all these actors and celebrities and musicians and whatnot. And I'm sure once you get to a certain level of wealth, fame, notoriety, what have you, certain doors open to you and you are made privy to certain information. So, I mean, in a way, I think that makes a lot of sense. And you know, it could be also like an Occam's razor type situation. You know, those first couple Linkin Park albums are so angry and angsty and so great. And then they kind of started, you know, slowly petering off after that. And you know, this is going to be an odd person to quote here, but like one of the best quotes about this sort of thing that I've ever heard came from Dane Cook, like the comedian. Back in the day. And
what happened to that fucking guy? He just like went off the rails after being like the greatest comedian in the world for like 5 years.
Yeah, I think he kind of, you know, went crazy and got canceled. But anyway, in some interview when he was like on his downward spiral, I think somebody asked him, he was like, you know, people say you're not funny anymore. Like, what do you have to say to that? And he said, it's hard to be funny when you're rich and happy. And I think that really sums up a lot of this stuff. Yeah, Chester had a horrible childhood, but you know, at some point, the money and the fame has to make that a little bit easier to deal with. And like, I don't know, I think all these musicians and, you know, filmmakers and whatnot, you know, everybody's like, oh, their old stuff was better. Well, it probably was, because a lot of that stuff came from a place of anger,
they had to try
sadness
to make
and
it there.
hunger, either, you know, literally or figuratively. And, you know, even something as simple as Empire Strikes Back is the best Star Wars movie because that's George Lucas's divorce movie. He was fucking miserable when he was making that movie, and it's the best one. You know, so I think there just
I'll agree with that.
Something to be said for, you know, not being fat and happy. You know, like no good art has ever come out of, you know, rich and happy people.
I mean, that's definitely true. I mean, I don't know. It just kind of seems like there's always these. Maybe it's something that naturally happens within generations, or something that is something that they purposely will play into. But I don't know, just like the overwhelming amount of like anti-authority that was fine-tuned in our generation, I just kind of find fascinating. And just the fact that it doesn't just go into like teenage culture, like it even goes down to, again, like kid shows and everything like that, that, you know, the coolest character in the kid shows was the one who didn't listen to authority and went off and did his own thing. And like, again, every single kid show started off with some punk band that was doing like the theme song for it, which punk in its own right is essentially fuck authority and everything. I mean, Simple Plan doing the song for Scooby-Doo, Good Charlotte getting involved with kid stuff. You look at their first albums and all their albums are like, fuck you parents, essentially. Like Good Charlotte, the happiest day of my life is the day that I die. Like, this is the stuff that our generation was like raised up on. Like, it was totally normal. And it's just like, again, it's almost kind of seems like we were intentionally meant to be a counterculture.
Yeah. No, and yeah, that's a funny thought too. So, I got a new car like a month ago, and my previous car didn't have XM, and my new one does. So I've just been like on the free trial of XM, like tearing it up. And there's this channel called like Alt 2K, and it's like all this kind of music, like from when we grew up, and like that's pretty much all I listen to now. It's like Linkin Park and Blink 182 and all this kind of stuff we're talking about. Like, man, a lot of these songs in retrospect like went way harder than they needed to.
Right? Like I said, dude, listen to some Good Charlotte, and that was like a popular band, like mainstream popular band.
Yeah.
And they got some like crazy dark lyrics for being like a poppy punk band, right?
Yeah. I mean, some of this stuff sounds kind of, you know, fun and jazzy on the surface, but yeah, it can get pretty dark and go pretty hard. So,
well, I guess kind of starting to wrap this one up. I just got one last video that I kind of want to throw as like a closing thought on this one. This is something that goes back to talking about 60s counterculture, but I feel like it's also relevant for this. I'm going to hit play. Let me know if the audio is playing, because it seems like it's being funky today.
The media reacted initially quite positively because this all seemed very benign, and it all had to do with love and being colorful and that sort of thing. But rather quickly, it became frightening. Complete destruction of any kind of certainty or structure or ambition. And that their children were going to get caught up in something that was going to leave them helpless and bewildered a few years down the road. I think the parents of daughters were more alarmed than the parents of sons. There was certainly an overtly anti-parental or kind of war of the generations aspect to all this, where people were urged to reject their parents. The media reacted initially.
See, and this is talking about 60s counterculture,
Mm-hmm.
but tell me that this doesn't almost seem like an exact mirror or correlation with exactly what we're talking about with our generation with the counterculture.
Yeah, and I mean, we're playing this out in real time again. Like you said, it's the whole like millennials versus boomers thing, and like Gen Z seems to not like anybody. Like I don't quite know
and it goes
what's
into
going on
like
with that.
the Maoistic idea that the only way that you can create this new generation is to separate them from the previous one. So it almost kind of seems like this has been trials since the 60s to figure out how far what we can do to try to separate generations. Because if you follow it down the line, like it almost kind of seems like it gets farther and farther. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
in different ways, of course. You have the 60s guys, which they all turned into like, hippies. They want to go off and live on land, all that kind of stuff. So the best reaction back to that would, of course, be to start creating the yuppie culture, because then the counterculture almost becomes like the yuppie culture. And then the reverse of that again reverses back to this anti-establishment fuck authority culture. So it almost kind of seems like it's like this intentional back and forth shift of like counterculture. Because even where we are now, if you really think about it, the counterculture is being like country or being like natural and stuff like that. Like the like
going
punk,
off the
colored
grid.
hair, piercings, tattoos, that's become the normal culture.
Yeah,
so we're currently
exactly.
in this stage where we're back to that flip, almost like the yuppie point with the culture, where like what you would assume would be the normal culture is actually the counterculture.
Yeah, and so I can't remember where I heard this, but it's probably on one of those like Woodstock documentaries. But something that I've heard at some point was like, before like the 50s or 60s, the idea of like the teenager did not exist. You were either a child or you were an adult. And like you said, you like, helped your parents on the farm till you were old enough to like go and, get married yourself and start your own farm or whatever. But then like with the Industrial Revolution and things like that, and like once people came back from World War II, this idea of like the teenager started to be established. And I think that's kind of a big part of all of this. Like without that happening, I'm not sure that any of these like counterculture and, different generational divides happen.
That is very true. It almost kind of seems like differentiating that group almost kind of makes it so that now you can have a divide where it's like between the kids and between the adults. So it almost kind of makes it so the generations are easier to separate, because if you just have the kids and the adults, you're going to have the kids always looking up to the adults. But if you have the teenager, they're the one in there that starts disrespecting authority and wants to go off and do their own thing and become independent. So once you give them the name of like, you're a teenager, it almost kind of is like putting on a lab coat. It gives them like a sense of like authority just off of like a specific word. And then off of that, again, they go off and they want to be like their own version of adults. So even just the concept of teenager almost kind of seems like it could be an intentional psyop.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's kind of funny that seems to be like a post-World War II kind of Cold War invention or shift in the populace. So yeah, a lot to unpack there. Really interesting stuff. Like I said, I wish I kind of got my thoughts together a little bit more for this one, but yeah, I'd love to touch some more stuff like this in the future. This has been a fun one.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you want to, man, with a little bit more context, maybe we can dive into some more song lyrics. And if the listeners enjoyed us talking about this, maybe we can do an actual episode about it and actually give a little bit more context and really like dive into the background and stuff and everything. It might be fun to actually just turn into an episode at some point.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, with that, of course, I guess we will shift on here. Orin, what have you got for us today, sir?
All right. So what I have brought today is an article, and I'm also going to kind of pontificate and go off the rails about the article as well. So, recently on the show, we've been talking a lot about like time and time being, in the fourth dimension and things like that. And I recently reread Slaughterhouse 5 by Kurt Vonnegut, which is like my all-time favorite book. I've read it like...
I'm glad that you brought this up because I have literally had this on my audiobook list to listen to at work, and I've had it there for like 2 months, and I've been like, I really need to listen to that. But after this episode and seeing you send this article, now it's moved up to the top of my list.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you, had you read it? Because, I mean, if you haven't, stop whatever you're doing after we record and start reading it. But
I had a good friend, Tex, from Beyond Top Secret Texan. We're talking about fifth dimension, fourth, like this kind of stuff. And he brought up this book in passing, talking about the beings in this. So I'm glad that you're bringing this up with more context, because it was just kind of passing in conversation, and I didn't really get to dive too hard into it.
Well,
so,
we'll go deep into it tonight. But yeah, so this is like my all-time favorite book. I've read it like 4 or 5 times, but I haven't read it in a while. Definitely not like since I've been on the show and we've been talking about a lot of this stuff. But this last reread, I was like shocked by how much of it touches on like these concepts and these ideas that we've been talking about. So just a little bit of background. Slaughterhouse 5 was written in 1969. It's kind of like a semi-autobiographical novel. It was written by Kurt Vonnegut, who was a World War II veteran who survived the firebombing of Dresden, which is pretty crazy. The plot of this book kind of sounds asinine when you try to explain it, but
like most good stories.
Yeah. So basically, the protagonist is a young man named Billy Pilgrim, and he's a prisoner of war during World War II. So kind of this is the autobiographical nature of it.
Any relation to Scott Pilgrim?
No. None.
Okay, I was just making
that
sure.
I'm aware of, anyway.
He's his distant relative.
Yeah. So at one point, Billy becomes what he calls unstuck in time, and this means that he like repeatedly experiences like different events in his life in like this non-linear fashion, almost like he's kind of time traveling through his own life. And at another point, he gets abducted by a race of aliens called the Tralfamadorians, and they're these fourth dimensional beings who see time all at once. And I've got this quote here. They quote, simultaneously observe all points in the space-time continuum. They universally adopt a fatalistic worldview. Death means nothing to them, and their typical response to hearing about death is, so it goes. And that's used in the book whenever like a death occurs, and it happens like 106 times in the book. And this is like a 200-page book. So basically every other page you're getting the so it goes.
It almost kind of sounds like the whole like Gnostic idea that it's
like,
kind of, you're going into something else. So it's just like, it's not really death. It's just kind of like, all right, see
so
you in the next realm.
Yeah. So later on in the story, Billy is taken to their home planet, which is called Tralfamador. And he's placed in like this zoo-like structure with a female human movie star. And so they're supposed to like basically be like zoo exhibits for these aliens. And they're supposed to like breed and mate and, just provide entertainment.
Of the Orville that is actually inspired by this that I didn't actually catch that, which ironically also the Orville, wonderful show, is also what made me aware of Flatlands. So anybody that's into like weird sci-fi Star Trek stuff, it's made by the guy who makes Family Guy. He's like one of the main guys in
Seth
it.
MacFarlane.
Yeah, he's one of the main guys in it, but there's literally an episode where it's basically they get kidnapped and put into a zoo like this. Like if you want some great sci-fi that almost kind of has like the Star Trek style writing, like Orville is fantastic for even making references to this.
Yeah, I might have to check that out. So I guess
at least that one episode.
I'll go ahead and jump into the article at this point. And this comes from the Michigan Daily. So up there in your neck of the woods, Shane.
Whoop, whoop.
And the article is titled Unstuck in Time, 4 Dimensions in Slaughterhouse 5. And Shane, unless you got anything else, I'll go ahead and jump into the article.
Hop right in, sir.
All right. In 10th grade English, as our final book of the year, my class cracked open Kurt Vonnegut's 1969 novel, Slaughterhouse 5. After a grueling year of classics like Gulliver's Travels, All Quiet on the Western Front, and the Canterbury Tales, I assumed that Slaughterhouse 5 would be more of the same long-winded stories that had populated our classes up to that point. The title reminded me of Animal Farm, and filled me with expectations of complex allegories or tedious legends from a slaughterhouse. But as I read the first few chapters, I was surprised to find that Slaughterhouse 5 was, well, good. Now in college, I remember very few things from the first time I read Kurt Vonnegut's novel. I remember something about aliens and a celebrity named Montana. I remember descriptions of the Dresden firebombing, which at the time I didn't realize was a true historical event. Most importantly, I remember a description of an idea of time, one that may have come from the book itself or possibly my teacher attempting to explain its complex idea. The way to think of the timeline of someone's life, according to Vonnegut's ideas and my teacher's careful explanation, is not as a straight line as we tend to think, but similar to a book. When you hold a book in your hands, you hold the entire story, start to finish. Every event in the book has already been written. While we are logically programmed to read the book from start to end, this is not the only way to experience its events. You can open the book to any page, any time in the story, and you will be able to experience that event even if it's done out of order. This is an idea of time as the fourth dimension, beyond the 3 dimensions of space. Vonnegut's novel itself is utterly perplexing in many ways. Slaughterhouse 5 is partially first person, narrated by a stand-in for Vonnegut, and partially third person with a grand sense of omniscience. In the introduction, the narrator tells you exactly how the book will begin and exactly how it will end. It's a novel impossible to place in a single genre, filled with war and aliens and inherent human grief. It toes a line between historical fiction and science fiction that few authors have accomplished. But what is more perplexing is the way that Slaughterhouse 5 proposes the concept of time, a proposal that forever changed the way I thought about time. Listen, Billy Pilgrim has come unstuck in time, the narrator tells us at the beginning of the first chapter. Billy's journey throughout the novel is not linear, but spastic, bouncing between events in his life without rhyme or reason. These jumps tend to be triggered at particularly desperate or traumatic moments, and often result in skipping full decades.
Not to cut you off here, by the way, but have you seen the movie Arrival by chance? The newer one, not the 80s one. So the way that this book is written, is it almost kind of like how they're describing time in that movie, where it's almost like they have flashbacks when something happens, and it almost like shows like a future event or like a past event. It's kind of weird how they describe time in that, but essentially they describe time almost like a circle, and you can hop in at any point, and once you're aware that time exists like a circle, you can have something at this particular time remind you of something that you're already aware of that'll happen in the future. Like, the timeline was really confusing in that movie, Arrival, but it almost kind of seems like it's somewhat similar to this.
Very much so. And I hadn't seen that movie in a long time. I probably need to go back and watch it in light of all that. But I've also got some quotes that I've prepared straight from the book that kind of give a little bit more context to like their views of time and whatnot. But yeah, it seems like kind of par for the same course.
See, almost at a certain point, it's kind of like that manifesting thought concept that clearly there's this idea that needs to be described. And I don't know, either you can look at it one of two ways. Either one person influences the next person and it kind of continues on down the line like that, or two, time really is described somewhat like this, and a bunch of different people are getting this like inspiration in their mind and basically trying to express this concept in their own way of doing it. And it kind of gets into, again, of that whole idea about, is this something that naturally is intended to be figured out to the point where it's almost like the universe is trying to give multiple people this perspective so that more people can understand it from different perspectives?
It kind of like the muses giving certain people this information.
Yeah, exactly. Because honestly, when you really start breaking down the timeline concept, you know, the whole like grandfather thing doesn't seem like it necessarily works, because it appears that if you're on this timeline and you go back and you mess something up in the timeline, like you're already on that timeline and that's why you exist on that timeline. So it seems like that whole concept of like how 80s sci-fi really worked kind of has gotten thrown out the window in like recent years. And now it's more about this concept of like time all happening at once, and it doesn't matter where you hop in at, those events happen there already, and that's the reason why you're on your current timeline.
Yeah, I mean, wasn't there that movie a few years ago, like Everything All the Time All at Once or some shit like that?
Yeah, exactly. So, that's like the same concept. Like theoretically, like if I discovered a time machine in 10 years and I went back in time and I squished a butterfly in dinosaur time and I came back to now, it's like I would have already have done that in my timeline, because in that timeline I got the machine. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
So it's like,
keep that in
it may
mind.
not have happened yet, but it's already happened because it's still within that same timeline. So it's like, you couldn't mess up your timeline because you already did it in your timeline. Just you're looking at it from your perspective at that particular time.
Keep that thought in mind when I read some of my quotes that I've brought at the end.
Hey, that being said, also, maybe that's why we can't go back and say, oh, you know how there's people that make that argument that say we'll never discover time travel, and we know that because we don't see any examples in the past? maybe the reason we don't see examples in the past is because the events that people came back from the past to do are things that have already happened, so
Yeah.
the timeline doesn't change with stuff in the future happening.
No, makes sense. All right, you got anything else before I jump back in?
No, sir.
All right, so jumping back in. This is connected to Billy's experience as a soldier in Dresden, Germany, where he survives, being a prisoner of war, as well as the destructive firebombing of Dresden in 1945. After the war, Billy is hospitalized for PTSD. It's around this time that he starts becoming unstuck, and the two things are clearly linked. Even if being unstuck is a product of a psychiatric disorder, it's still fascinating to consider. Despite his position in time, Billy also believes that he was abducted by the Tralfamadorians, an alien race that keeps him in a zoo. Importantly, the Tralfamadorians see in 4 dimensions, rather than the 3 dimensions of space that humans remain limited to understanding. The Tralfamadorians see our 3 dimensions plus time. According to the narrator, this means that they view the idea of life and death differently. Quote, when a Tralfamadorian sees a corpse, all he thinks is that the dead person is in a bad condition in that particular moment, but that the same person is just fine in plenty of other moments. End quote. This view of time means that one can view their life much more holistically. Rather than focusing on the loss of one moment, the Tralfamadorians find the life in the previous moments. This ties to the common Tralfamadorian saying, so it goes. What has happened has happened. What is going to happen will. So it goes. Films, books, and other media dealing with time travel often try to explore the idea of changing the past or the future, like you were just saying. Plot lines are based around acting on questions like, what would I have done differently? And how do I prevent this from happening? I've sometimes heard questions like, would you kill baby Hitler thrown around, often jokingly and with little regard for the reality of the space-time continuum. In Vonnegut's proposed version of time, however, these questions are irrelevant. Changing the past means that this version of the future would not exist. And if we've learned anything from Disney Channel's That's So Raven, it's that trying to change the future usually results in making it happen. I haven't watched That's So Raven, so I don't know what he's talking
You've
about.
never
there.
even seen that as a kid?
I mean,
so
my sister
basically
watched
what happens,
it, but I don't know about
what happens
this.
in that show is she like gets like a vision of the future, and then she gets a vision of the future of like, you know, for example, her friend getting something spilled on her, for example. And later on, she goes about trying to prevent her friend getting anything spilled on her. So in the turn of her trying to prevent that, she'll like turn around and bump somebody, and they'll end up spilling something all over her friend, and that's what she saw in the vision, essentially. So
Gotcha.
it's like
So it's
this
like
whole
a
idea that as she tries
prophecy.
to prevent things from happening, she realizes that the reason that they happen is because she's trying to prevent them from happening, essentially.
Gotcha. Oh, that's pretty trippy, man.
I mean, it definitely goes into like one of those things like, you know, if people are aware of when they're going to die, it almost kind of makes it so that they're like, it might lead into the reason why they end up dying because they're like aware of where they might end up dying. You know what I mean? Like the one time that they're in this place, it's like, oh, okay, here we are now. And it's one of those like confusing things where it's just, yeah. Anyways, you go on.
All right. So there's only a couple more paragraphs here. I'll try to go ahead and knock this out. I should clarify that I don't believe this means we don't have free will, nor that we should believe that actions don't have real consequences. In the novel, Billy becomes fatalistic, believing that all events and actions come down to destiny. I don't agree. Instead, it's about trying to find a balance between these ideas, finding a way to live in the moment without dwelling on the past or a future over which you have no control. It's the idea of viewing time not just as a long line stretching somewhere into the future, but into something a bit more elastic in both directions. There's a reason Slaughterhouse 5 stuck strongly in my mind for the past 4 years. Time as a fourth dimension is fascinating and oddly comforting. There is no use trying to change the past. That much has always been clear. But it's nice to look toward the future and realize that there will always be a future. There are many parts of time that I'll never understand, no matter how hard I try. But it's a comfort to know that no matter how messed up things are in the present, life goes on. There will be deaths, war, and pandemics. There will be moments where it feels as though we will never make it through this moment. But if I've learned anything from Slaughterhouse 5, it's that there will be another moment after this one, and another moment after that. So it goes. So, do you have anything to add now that we're done with the article?
Honestly, I just definitely need to make sure that I read this book now because I'm absolutely fascinated by it, and this just kicked me in the ass a little bit more to make sure that I get it listened to this week. So,
So I do have a couple of quotes that I've kind of written down. If you don't mind me sharing those, if it won't spoil the book too much for you.
no, absolutely. I just want to throw in, of course, first that I find it fascinating that as I really started diving into this concept of time, that I realized that there is so many other people have thought about it the same way and they wonder about it the same way. So again, I go back into this idea that it almost kind of seems like it's an idea that is trying to be described in a third dimension reality. Like it's like really trying and pushing. And this gets into this whole idea about these fourth dimensional beings and how they could possibly be influencing our reality.
Yeah.
Like if you get into this whole concept of these things being internal and you get into like the whole, like, you know, like string theory concept, that
Absolutely.
essentially reality is compressed within itself. That would mean that whatever the fourth dimension is somehow internally inside of us by whatever that means. Hard to probably describe again, like I've said a million times in a third dimensional perspective, but these beings, of course, when you think about the subconscious, when you think about these little like signs or these little like hints that kind of push you in different directions, is it possible that these things could possibly be like influencing these things? Because even when you get into like symbols of things, like it becomes like universal where even people who have never talked to each other in ancient cultures are still pushing these ideas forth in these symbols. Like, is it because we're dealing with higher dimensional beings that are trying to portray ideas that they can't necessarily describe or portray? So their best action and course of trying to do that is by going to as many different cultures as possible and trying to get them to describe it from their perspective, so that hopefully as a whole society will kind of find this middle point almost of like all these different descriptions of trying to describe the same idea.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something to that. And like I said, this novel was written in 1969, and Vonnegut is talking about a lot of things that are like just now gaining traction in like the scientific and ufology communities. Like he talks about like wormholes and time travel and the fourth dimension and even like consciousness and like Akashic records type stuff. At one point in the book, they even talk about how like vampires and werewolves and goblins and angels and things like that are real, but they come from the fourth dimension, which I thought was just like kind of trippy and crazy to think about. And this is in a book that's, almost 60 years old.
Dude, especially from like 60s previous. Like everything was written as like fiction because you couldn't just like write a book like this stating these types of things. Like even going into like Animal Farm, like if Orson, if he wanted to actually like portray his ideas and actually wanted to just say what he was trying to say directly, he like would have gotten himself in trouble at the time. It's like you had to try to portray your ideas through fiction. And honestly though, I mean, if you're trying to describe something in a science book or you had a whole entire fiction novel to try to describe a concept, I almost feel like it would stick in people's minds and be easier to comprehend as a fiction book rather than if somebody was reading it as like a science book, because your brain is interpreting it a different way.
Well, what's that saying?
It's almost like kicking into the subconscious rather than kicking into like the conscious. You know what I mean? Like when you read a story, these background ideas get laid into your subconscious mind and you think about them later. Like look at how many books you've probably have read a million times. You have them sitting in the back of your mind and then you hit the right information. And all of a sudden you say, wait, that sounds like it connects with this. Like that's like a prime example of it. It just like sticks in your mind completely differently because it's in your subconscious instead of in your conscious.
Well, and there's some sort of saying about like fiction is the best form of truth or something like, I can't remember exactly how it's worded, but basically that idea, like you can say things in, the form of fiction, quote unquote, that you couldn't come out and say because people would think it's ridiculous, but you can tell the truth in a piece of fiction in a way that you never could in a piece of fact, And
people don't realize it till like 50 to 100 years later normally.
Yep. So jumping into some of these quotes that I think will just give you and our listeners and viewers a little bit more of a flavor for not only the book, but also, this concept of time we've been talking about. And this first quote comes from pages 26 and 27 of my edition. It says, "The creatures were friendly, and they could see in 4 dimensions. They pitied Earthlings for only being able to see in 3. They had many wonderful things to teach Earthlings, especially about time." And I'm going to skip forward a little bit, and it says, "The most important thing I learned on Tralfamadore," and this is Billy speaking, the protagonist, "was that when a person dies, he only appears to die. He is still very much alive in the past, so it is very silly to cry at his funeral. All moments, past, present, and future, always have existed, always will exist. The Tralfamadorians can look at all of the different moments just the way we can look at a stretch of the Rocky Mountains, for instance. They can see how permanent all the moments are, and they can look at any moment that interests them. It is just an illusion we have here on Earth that one moment follows another, like beads on a string, and that once a moment is gone, it is gone forever. When I myself hear that somebody is dead, I simply shrug and say what the Tralfamadorians say about dead people, which is so it goes. And these next couple, I think, are really good, and they kind of go together. Let me get back to my notes. I'm sorry. Where am I? Said Billy Pilgrim. Trapped. Oh, excuse me. I read the wrong one. All right, so this one comes from page 76 and 77, and this is when Billy gets abducted. Welcome aboard, Mr. Pilgrim, said the loudspeaker. Any questions? Billy licked his lips, thought a while, inquired at last. Why me? That is a very earthling question to ask, Mr. Pilgrim. Why you? Why us, for that matter? Why anything? Because this moment simply is. Have you ever seen bugs trapped in amber? Yes. Billy, in fact, had a paperweight in his desk, which was a blob of polished amber with 3 ladybugs embedded in it. Well, here we are, Mr. Pilgrim, trapped in the amber of this moment. There is no why. And this next quote kind of piggybacks off of that one. Where am I? Said Billy Pilgrim. Trapped in another, in another blob of amber. We are where we have to be just now. 300 million miles from Earth, bound for a time warp which will get us to Tralfamador in hours rather than centuries. How? How did I get here? It would take another Earthling to explain it to you. Earthlings are the great explainers, explaining why the event is structured as it is, telling how other events may be achieved or avoided. I'm a Tralfamadorian, seeing all time as you might see a stretch of the Rocky Mountains. All time is all time. It does not change. It does not lend itself to warnings or explanations. It simply is. And I'm going to leave with just one more quote. This is toward the end of the book, and I think it's really good, and it kind of sums up all these ideas and, kind of this idea of free will versus, our own choices and destiny and things like that. But it says, quote, if what Billy Pilgrim learned from the Tralfamadorians is true, that we will live forever, no matter how dead we may sometimes seem to be. I am not overjoyed, but still, if I'm going to spend eternity visiting this moment and that, I'm grateful that so many of those moments are nice. And that's all I got.
It almost kind of seems like again, it seems like it's very inspired by, or Arrival rather, is very inspired by this. Like this, again, came out in, what was it, 1960 something?
69.
So that, yeah, so this kind of seems like it was kind of like not the beginning, but like where sci-fi was really, really starting to kick off, is Star Trek and all that type of stuff. So I'm sure that this is one of those books that if you really start like diving into it, you'll probably find inspiration from it into a lot of other things. But going back to the writer himself, he seems like he was probably really inspired by like Gnostic texts. He's probably really inspired by like occult thought. And it almost kind of seems like he gets into this whole concept that I've talked about before, which is like this, you keep following the dimensions up, and it almost kind of seems like you might get to a point where there's like this infinite being where, everything that looks like chaos to you is complete sense to whatever this being is. Like, you shatter a glass and it looks like it's complete chaos going in a million different directions. But to this being that's from the highest dimension possible, he is fully aware, or it is fully aware of like the trajectory of it, where every single specific piece is going to go. And it's not chaos anymore. It becomes exactly planned, exactly how it's supposed to be, which goes back into this whole idea of like free will, that if you get into the whole idea about like higher dimensional beings possibly influencing lower dimensional beings, you may be under the illusion that you have free will, but under that definition, I mean, you may not have any free will, because even going back into the idea of this book, if all time exists as how it is, this is getting into this occult idea that I was just talking about, that again, you don't have any choice of free will. Everything's predetermined, and maybe there's different paths you can get to the same point, but no matter what, that same point is destined to happen.
Yeah, and I think, that could be a terrifying thought, and it could be a comforting thought, depending on what way you want to look at it. But, like we were saying, this book is from 1969.
You die when you're supposed to die. You live when you're supposed to live. Like, you live the experience that you're supposed to experience, so it's not like, oh, I wish I was around longer, or wish I was around less. Like, this is exactly the time that you're supposed to be here for, essentially. And that's almost like comforting to me in a weird way, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of makes you wonder if like Vonnegut was like plugged into something or like receiving some sort of, information from the ether or somewhere. Because, like you said, a lot of ideas, and not just his writing in this book, but across his various novels and short stories and things like that. Like, they pop up a lot in other like pop culture and sci-fi. Like, even in Stranger Things, there's a lot of nods to Vonnegut. So, like, Vonnegut is probably your favorite writer's favorite writer. Like, anybody who like really likes Vonnegut, like, doesn't dabble in Vonnegut. You like love Vonnegut. So I would definitely recommend, Shane, you read the book. And if you like this one, I can definitely recommend some of his other novels where you could jump off after that. I've read all of them, and there's some other pretty good ones other than this one. So I think you'd really enjoy this one in particular, though.
I'll have to make sure that he's the next person I go through, because I've been in a big H.P. Lovecraft thing lately, and I feel like I've pretty much gotten to the point now where I'm pretty much like have covered most of H.P. Lovecraft's library, so I'm going to need a new author to hop onto. So what not a better another new sci-fi writer to hop onto. So
well, there you
make
go.
Sure that Slaughterhouse 5, I dive into it this week, my friend.
Awesome.
Thank you again for bringing this one up.
Well, you have to let me know what you think about it.
Absolutely, man. And speaking of that, of course, you still have to dive into Flatlands, my friend.
Yes, I will. Or I'll try to anyway.
And with that, we will move on to the next thing. So this seems to be something that has become, weirdly enough, our calling card that we cover.
Our ongoing series we're doing here.
Yeah, like our ongoing series that we tend to like to cover. So without further ado, Orin, why don't you let them know what we're going to be covering this week now?
All right. So just like for the past couple of months, we have a new minor league baseball team doing like a special promotion where they dress up as a cryptid. So,
brother.
Yep. Thanks, Hulkster. So this article comes once again from sportslogos.net. And it says, Lehigh Valley Iron Pigs honor weepy legend with Squonk alternate identity.
Love it.
And so this is a short article, but there's some pretty cool pictures included in the article once we get down to them. But it says, the Lehigh Valley Iron Pigs, AAA affiliate of the Philadelphia Phillies in the International League, have taken accounts of a grotesque, unhappy mythical creature and turned it into an alternate identity. For one game, the Pigs will play as the Squonk, adopting a brand that portrays a miserable pig-like creature who hides deep in the northern Pennsylvania's hemlock forests. Per the team, the Squonk was first documented by William T. Cox in his 1910 book, Fearsome Creatures of the Lumberwood, which, Shane, I believe you talked about when we covered the Squonk on the show.
Yes, sir. If anybody wants more context on the Squonk, we did do a full episode on that, actually. So you guys can go back and check that out.
Definitely. The article goes on to say, the Squonk is a very... hang on. The Squonk is of a very retiring disposition, generally traveling about at twilight and dusk. Because of its misfitting skin, which is covered with warts and moles, it is always unhappy. Hunters who are good at tracking are able to follow a Squonk by its tear-stained trail, for the animal weeps constantly. When cornered, an escape seems impossible, or when surprised and frightened, it may even dissolve itself in tears. The alternate identity centers around a stressed-out Squonk character peering out of an outline of the state of Pennsylvania. The logo is meant to represent the creature nervously making its first ever public appearance. A fleshy wordmark spells out Squonk in a texture that evokes hairy, warted skin. Custom caps and on-field jerseys are dark green and brown, colors drawn from the forest where the Squonk lives. While the Squonk is famously reclusive, the team hopes that turning it into an alternate identity will draw it out of hiding. By highlighting the classic Pennsylvania folk legend, the team said in a statement, the Iron Pigs hope to show the Squonk that it too can be loved and will be found beautiful by the Iron Pigs fan base. So at the bottom of the article there's a picture of some of the merchandise, some hats, the jerseys, different T-shirts. So this one's pretty cool. I really like the main Squonk logo. I still think the Dogman is my favorite alternate identity that we've covered. But what do you think about this one, Shane?
I dig the logo. besides the word squonk because it looks like a ball bag.
It very much
all I
looks
can
like a
see.
nutsack. I had that same thought.
That's all I can see.
Yeah.
As soon as I got to the words and I saw the hair, little pubic
And like the
looking
little
things
bumps.
on top, like I don't think that they thought that word out very well. Like the logo
They
itself,
just
very
needed
cool.
like
With
one
the squonk,
pervert friend to like tell them that's not a good idea. Like for all of our just audio listeners out there, imagine if a ball sack was turned into a font. This is what's on the front of the jerseys.
like I don't see it as the squonk. That's all I see it as, man. Like they had multiple people approve this, and not one person said that looked like a ball bag.
Yeah.
Even coming from the locker room, not one person in the locker room said our logo looks like a ball bag.
Yeah, this was like probably focus group to all hell, and like nobody was like, "Hey, maybe we shouldn't put a fucking nutsack on the front of our jersey."
So I'll give them that one at least. The colors are great. The logo itself is very cool. I still think the Michigan Dogman definitely has the coolest logo. But that being said, I think the Grassman one definitely has the coolest jersey because they have that like grass print covered jersey. But the Squonk definitely created the best new text that people are going to be using this year, I think.
Yeah.
So at least I got that going for me.
Yeah, like fuck wingdings and papyrus and all that. We got the ball bag font now.
They would have been better off just putting the squonk on the front. I'm sorry, but dude, even the logos on the other one where it's like the classic letters, you know, with the bold like green, it would have been better off, man. They should just put the squonk on the back and not try to make the squonk letters.
But the squonk hat is pretty sweet. I kind of like that one.
Yeah, I was gonna say I dig the green one. The brown one's pretty cool, and the black shirt's pretty cool. I'm gonna have to maybe make myself broke this summer once we figure out all the teams that are doing this stuff. I got to pick up one little piece of merch from each of them, right?
Well, hey, at the rate we're going, you're going to be broke because I mean we're 3 for 3 the past 3 months with these baseball team alternate cryptid identities. So I'll be on the lookout for more of these, and if anything else pops up, I will share it with you guys next month.
Here we got to take a gamble here. What do you think might be the next team that might pop up?
Man, there has to be some team in Kentucky to do like a Kentucky Goblins thing. Like that seems like a fucking layup. How has nobody done that yet?
That is very true. I was thinking that, but I had to go back to the default cryptid that nobody has actually hit yet. I think that West Virginia might be the next one that pops up with a Mothman team because they hold that shit very near and dear, especially if it's a semi-pro team that's or minor league team that's somewhat near Mount Pleasant.
Point Pleasant.
I think the next one that might, or Point Pleasant. Yeah, why did I say Mount Pleasant? Ugh. Point Pleasant. I think the next one that might pop up might be Mothman.
Yeah, that would be a good one. That's a layup as well. So
that'd be a killer logo too, dude. But hopefully they don't try to do some kind of weird fuzzy logo because that might end up looking real weird real quick.
Well, hopefully no ball sacks will be involved in Mothman.
I mean, never know, man. There might be a big booty though. They got to include the booty at least.
I mean, booties and ball sacks. Who knew that minor league baseball was so erotic?
Oh, wrong button.
Brother.
There it is. So diving into the last thing that we're going to be diving into today, it's been a little while since we've done something that is absolutely batshit fucking ridiculous. And I know that there was some podcasts that were covering this relatively recently, so I wanted to make sure that we hit it before it got too far off. But without further ado, let's get into this new weird article.
Florida man claims to have been kidnapped by dolphins and forced to build an underwater city. The man was found early Monday morning on the side of a beach in Lee County, soaking wet, dehydrated, and confused. When deputies arrived, he was drawing detailed diagrams in the sand. According to the man, a pod of dolphins took him while he was swimming and brought him to a place about 40 feet under the surface. He said they forced him to help build underwater structures. He told deputies the dolphins communicated with him using clicks. He said the group had a leader named Gerald who somehow helped him breathe underwater, possibly by creating an airspace. The man spent 3 days working on what he described as cities, towns, and condo-like structures. When the dolphins were satisfied with his work, they sent him back to the surface and told him they would return for phase 2. Medical staff treated him for dehydration, but found no signs of head injury or mental confusion. Tests showed seawater and marine particles in his lungs, suggesting he had been deep underwater for a long time without typical lung damage. This was unusual and raised questions for doctors. The man holds a master's degree in aerospace engineering and has experience with deep sea technology, which he says is why the dolphins chose him. Some people think the story is false, but the physical evidence has made others curious. Let me know what you think.
So what do you think about this one right off the bat? Because There are some weird facets to this, which I will definitely get into. But what are your initial thoughts on this one?
My initial thought is Florida man, of course. My second
always a Florida man.
My second initial thought is crystal meth must be one hell of a drug. And then I came back around and I was like, well, how did he get those particles in his lungs? And the Dolphins seem to have like a very efficient hiring and procurement procedure. Like maybe we need to get Dolphins to like run companies. I mean, they seem to have their shit on lock. I mean, they've even got different phases of their construction projects. I mean, who knew Dolphins were just such great civic planners?
Dude, on the other flip side of that, though, there are some weird facets of this, though. There's one, the whole thing that there's this, like, they don't want you to communicate with dolphins. Have you heard this, like, whole thing that it's, like, specifically, like, they only are supposedly, like, allow scientists to try to, like, communicate with dolphins, and when, like, pseudoscientists try to get involved with this, like, the projects get shut down really quick. There's also the same thing that gets in with, like, whales and everything, that with some of the recent research, they're discovering that these things are, like, significantly more intelligent than we ever thought that they were. Mm-hmm. And that they believe that if they figure out how to have conversations in like dolphin or whale speak, that they might actually be able to have like intelligent conversations with these things. So it's like, there's some weird facets to it. And then there's some other things that do actually probably connect in with some things. And I know that this one isn't directly related, but do you remember having Nomar Slevik on the show before?
Yeah. The guy from Maine.
Yeah. Do you remember when he shared the story about the guy who got brought underwater by the frog people?
Yeah.
So tell me that doesn't sound extremely similar to this story, down to the facet of they put him inside of some type of like bubble type of thing so he was able to breathe. They had full cities and everything down there. They used him to do this type of stuff. Like, this story sounds ridiculous, but on the other side, there are more stories like this. And on the other side of it, again, this guy wasn't just some fucking, what was the name of that damn Bigfoot guy from Florida? He wasn't just
Snake
like some
Parsons or some shit.
Yeah, that fucking snake guy from Florida. Like, this guy was actually was it aerial engineer or something like that?
An aerospace engineer, I think.
Yeah,
like I said,
engineer.
Their interview and procurement process is great, these Dolphins.
And holy shit, dude, you start diving into some of like the weird stuff on TikTok, dude. Like 3 o'clock in the morning, scrolling through TikTok after finding this, dude. People get into some ridiculous shit. There are videos on videos on videos of people just screaming about the fact that dolphins are fully like just as intelligent as we are, and they're building these like underwater cities and all this kind of shit, and they're like intelligence level has like recently like gotten to like a higher point where they now realize that they can like communicate with things from the surface, and that's why there's all these like, again, those projects getting shut down when people try to communicate with dolphins and everything. And then the other weird facet of the story was they talked about it on like normal news. This wasn't just like an internet thing. Like, this actually came from like the local news. This was talked about on a bunch of different, like, I remember seeing it actually on like Michigan news too, actually, weirdly enough. So it was one of those stories that like, it wasn't just some like internet joke. Like, it was talked about for a minute and then it was completely like silence. Like, I didn't hear anything else that came from it, nothing else. So it's like, it sounds ridiculous, but on the other side of it, there's some things that I kind of like question in the back of my mind. Like, they didn't even try to prove that it was ridiculous. They kind of just put the story out and then just like completely went into a different direction. But again, you come back to like, this isn't the first story like this either.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is probably one of the more right down the center reports from a like local news station on one of these like crazy ass things that have happened. Because normally, it's like very tongue in cheek and kind of making fun of the experiencer, but like they do like kind of lend a little bit of credence to it there at the end. And I also think it's funny that the leader of the Dolphins' name was Gerald. That seems like such an odd detail to throw in there. Like, I mean, who would come up with that?
That's just translated to English. His actual name was but you can't really say that in human, so you have to translate it to Gerald.
Well, Florida Man figured out how to translate it. So, I mean, we just need him to be like our intermediary between us and the Dolphins.
At a certain point, I kind of feel like it's almost like, have you ever been in one of those situations where somebody who speaks a totally different language is talking at you and you don't know what they're saying, but you kind of just piece stuff together like, okay, yeah, sure, yeah, wall, yes, that. I almost kind of feel like this guy was just getting yelled at by dolphins and he's like, your name's Gerald. I got it. I'm going to call you Gerald now. Like, he didn't know what they were saying to him unless they have other advanced technology. Because again, if he's not the first one that's taken this, maybe they got some of that Sam the Sandown clown technology, and maybe they're able to, translate it into another language. Or if they're telepathic, they can just put the thoughts in his head. Boop, boop, boop,
Now,
boop.
I mean, they use echolocation and all that kind of shit, so I mean, that wouldn't be much of a stretch now, would it?
See, and that gets real weird because there's also this, I forgot what the guy's name was, but they talked about him a long time ago on this Vice TV show that was called like something's Pharmacopoeia. And it was basically this like kind of like nerdy guy that would go around and like do all these different psychedelics and like talk about like the scientific experience of it and all this type of stuff. But he ended up talking to this one guy, and I don't remember his name offhand. I wish I remembered it, but he's this big proponent of ketamine. And he does like psychedelic research with like dolphins and stuff like that. And he talks about this whole thing about how he like supposedly like you can telepathically like communicate with dolphins and stuff like that. And that they actually like somehow like store memories and like stones at like the bottom of the water and stuff like that. So it's like, it sounds ridiculous, but when you start looking into like the fine-tuned dynamics of it, like the guy that it's coming from sounds ridiculous. But when you start looking into other research, it's like, okay, yeah, that kind of does make sense. That's kind of weird. Like even the whole storing memory in rocks, like, isn't that essentially what we're doing with computers?
Yeah.
If you really break it down and think about it.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, all this sounds ridiculous on the surface level, but, you know, even if you go back to like ancient tales of like mermaids and things like that, like maybe they're just talking about fucking dolphins the whole time. Who knows?
Or on the other flip side, you know, everybody talks about how grays appear as owls.
Mm-hmm.
What if mer people can screen memory people to appear as dolphins?
There you go, guys. You heard it here first.
I mean, that's not too far of a stretch, man. You think about like grays to owls, very, very similar in appearance. You think about dolphins and mermaids, and they're very, very similar in appearance. I mean, could all dolphins be fake? It's a psyop. No dolphins are real. They're actually mer people disguising themselves.
What about the undefeated 1972 Miami Dolphins? Were they real?
They're all mer people.
Okay.
It's bullshit. They're mer people.
Confirmed.
Mer people, mole people. Either or.
Either way.
So before I completely close this one up, man, I'm going to see if there maybe is some type of continuation that pops up, or maybe I can find another story that is relatively similar, but I'm not saying it is or it isn't, but it's definitely fascinating. But like, what are your final thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those stories, like we said, that sounds ridiculous just on the surface level. But I mean, if you just, you know, kind of open your mind and at least entertain the thought that, you know, there could be something a little bit weirder going on here. I mean, I think it's really interesting. And like you said, I'd be interested to see if we have any kind of follow-up or continuation on this. And maybe this is something that we can hit on a future episode.
Just to drop this one in here as a final thought, they do say that the most intelligent animals in the ocean are dolphins, whales, and octopus. And that's already one on that list. So, I mean, who knows what the level of their intelligence could be, because this is the same thing that I go back for on Sasquatch, that, you know, we define intelligence by like book smarts or these things that you're able to do in our society. But if you live in a totally different society, intelligence is described and functions in a completely different way. So just because, you know, we're intelligent in this way doesn't mean that we can say that this thing isn't intelligent in that way. Like realistically, we don't know that much about the ocean. We don't know that much about dolphins. And I'm not saying that they're like some underground society creating these like full structures underground.
Well, Gerald disagrees with you.
Other than maybe Gerald out there. But I mean, I definitely think that these things could definitely be just as intelligent as us, but maybe in a different form. And we just don't realize it because even again, like communication's different, because talking to somebody who's a scientist who speaks Spanish, if you don't speak Spanish, it just sounds like gibberish and means absolutely fucking nothing. So
yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, like flying an airplane's real fucking easy if you know how to fly an airplane, but it doesn't matter, you know, how smart you are if you don't know how to do something, you know? So I think that's a really interesting way of looking at things. And I think that's, you know, a good thought that people could carry over into normal everyday life and not just these crazy conspiracies is just because somebody, you know, thinks about things differently or their brain works differently or they have different skills and talents than you do. That doesn't mean they're lesser or less smart. They just, you know, have a different set of skills, or like a Liam Neeson in Taken. So yeah, I think that's some good lessons we can learn from the Dolphins and Gerald and Florida Man here.
Hey, and maybe there will be some more messages in the future, because maybe we'll realize that the dolphins were actually aliens the whole time. And these are these aquatic species that have been flying the UFOs out of the damn water. It's been the fucking dolphins the whole time.
You heard it here first.
Well, I guess with that, of course, that about wraps up our weirdness for today. And just to throw it in there, of course, to the listener Kelly out there, we do also still have your next clip. We just wanted to make sure that we got into this stuff because it was a little bit more topical. So we will be passing that one along to the next episode. So don't be afraid. You will be able to see your clip being talked about on June 1st. So,
yep, we got some good stuff planned already for next month's episode. And like Shayn said, you guys remember we are now switching to Mondays. So the next episode will be Monday, June 1st. And if anyone wants to get up with us for any reason whatsoever, Shayn, tell them how they can do that.
Depending on which show, of course, you're coming in through, you guys can either email us at bizarrerealitymedia@outlook.com or increaseourrealitypodcast@outlook.com. And of course, you guys could also get a hold of us through social media, Instagram and Facebook on either page for either show. You guys can also get a hold of us through our submission forms, which are available down in that show description. And last but not least, you guys can always call or text us on our Bizarre Reality Media hotline. And that number is 313-364-1551. And for all professional inquiries, you guys can get a hold of us at bizarrerealitymedia@outlook.com.
Because all this shit's so professional.
Oh, we are so professional, the utmost professional.
And if you guys would like to support the show and all the hard work that goes on behind the scenes, Shayn, what can they do?
First and foremost, you guys can go and check out our Patreon. We changed it where there's only one tier available over there, but you guys get full access with that. And if you guys want to check it out, see what it's all about, there is a 7-day free trial available. And if you guys like it, hopefully you guys end up sticking around.
And you can also check out the merch store with t-shirts starting at the absurdly low and oddly specific price of just $15.68 plus shipping. That was Dolphin speak for wow.
Wow. And I know times are tough out there, but if you guys would like to support the show in some other ways, you guys can always leave a review or rating for the show anywhere that you guys happen to listen or find us. And Orin, what are the general rules for that?
1 and 5 stars only.
And with that, of course, you will either get our love or you'll get our ridicule, but we'll have fun with it either way, and hopefully you guys will have fun with it either way.
And you guys also be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and follow the show on all the internet things. And y'all know how the internet works. Just do the things or don't. We don't really give a shit.
Just share the show. Grassroots support is the only way shows like this grow, so anything you guys do, we definitely appreciate. And if you guys want to keep up to date with us, as he mentioned, you guys can also go and follow us on Instagram and Facebook. And you guys can catch live shows and video content on the Bizarre Reality Media TikTok, YouTube, and Rumble channels.
And as always, all the shit we've mentioned is in the link tree in the show description.
And just like usual, I have to remind you guys every single episode to don't be afraid to always remain and stay the utmost bizarre.
Bizarre? Fucking Gerald, man.
Wow, man, freaked out! Freaked out! Brother. Ooh, yeah. Bang, splat, real fast.